The hot, humid air of the bunker smells of mold and damp earth. The only sounds are the buzz of a lone light bulb and the rustle of paper. Before the Japanese intelligence captain lie mountains, not of stone or ash, but of letters. These are captured American mailbags, a treasure trove. His job is to slice open this artery of communication, this vein that stretches across the Pacific from a home called America to its sons on these damned islands. He is a hunter. He searches for weakness. He looks for secrets, coordinates, ship names, mentions of low morale, any crack in the enemy's armor where a knife can be thrust. His hands work with surgical precision. A knife as sharp as a scalpel slits open an envelope. He unfolds a thin sheet of V-mail. His eyes, trained to spot ciphers, scan the lines. He expects to read of fear, of homesickness, of hatred for the war. Instead, he reads, "Dear Billy, hope you're doing okay. It's hot here in St. Louis. The Cardinals are looking good this season. I think they have a shot at the World Series. Dad finally saved up for that used Chevy he'd been dreaming of." The captain pauses, rereads it. Again. Baseball, a used Chevy. There is nothing in this letter. No valuable intelligence. Emptiness. He picks up the next letter. From Texas. A girl writes to her boyfriend about how she went to a dance with his brother so she wouldn't be lonely. The next. From New York. A mother complains that her son isn't eating enough and promises to send him homemade cookies. He works for hours, hundreds of letters, and everywhere it's the same. Baseball, cars, girls, movies, requests for comic books, complaints about a sergeant. And gradually in the silence of the bunker, the captain is overcome by a feeling he did not expect. Not disappointment, not contempt, but a cold primal horror. Because he, an intelligence officer trained to see hidden meanings, suddenly understood that the most terrifying message wasn't between the lines. It was in the lines themselves, in their deafening, impossible mundanity. For a Japanese soldier in World War II, a letter home was not just a message, it was a ritual, often a final one. In Japanese culture, there was a deep-rooted tradition of jisei, a death poem that a samurai would write before battle, or seppuku. In the 20th century, this tradition transformed. Now, soldiers wrote last letters. They didn't write them in trenches under fire. They wrote them in advance, in a calm setting, before being sent to the front and left them with their families. Or they wrote them before a decisive battle. This was not a spontaneous outpouring of emotion. It was an act of duty. Let's open a few such letters. They speak for themselves. Lieutenant Teruo Yamaguchi, a kamikaze pilot, wrote to his father, "I am writing this letter in the final hours of my life. I hope to die in battle, so my final moments are marked by service to the Emperor. Do not expect me to return alive." Soldier Isoroku Yamamoto. Not the Admiral, wrote to his mother, "Mother, please do not be sad when you learn of my death. I will die with a smile. I will die shouting Banzai for our Emperor. This is the greatest honor." Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi, founder of the kamikaze units, addressed the souls of his pilots. "You are already gods without earthly desires. You ask me to take care of the rest. I promise you that I will fight to the last to bring victory to our country." What do these letters tell us? There is almost nothing personal in them. No complaints, no fear, not even mentions of everyday details. They contain three main themes: duty, honor, and death. Death was not seen as a tragedy. It was seen as a culmination, a beautiful, though sad, finale. Japanese propaganda constantly used the image of the blooming cherry blossom. The sakura flower is beautiful, but its life is short. It falls at the peak of its beauty without withering. So too should a soldier die young and strong for the glory of the empire. A letter was a way to prepare one's family for this sacrifice, to convince them that this death was not in vain, that their son or husband would not simply perish, but would be transformed into a cherry blossom at the Yasukuni shrine. The soldier wrote not as a son or a husband, he wrote as a representative of his nation. His I was dissolved into the collective we. His life was merely fuel for the eternal fire of the Japanese spirit, the Yamato Damashi. These letters were sublime, tragic, saturated with fatalism. They were written by men who knew their world had shrunk to a single point, the point of a glorious death. If the Japanese letter was a farewell to life, the American letter was a desperate attempt to hold on to it. It wasn't a period at the end of a sentence, it was an ellipsis, a conversation put on pause, What did G.I. Joe, the average American kid, write home about? He wrote about things the Japanese officer could barely comprehend. He complained, "Mom, I can't eat any more of this canned spam. Please send something homemade." The sergeant made us clean the latrines again. I hate him. It's so hot here, it feels like my brain is melting. For a Japanese soldier raised on stoicism and absolute obedience, the very idea of complaining in a letter home would have been a disgrace. For an American, it was a birthright, the right to be unhappy. He asked for things. Send the latest Captain America comics. If you see Sally, tell her I miss her, and that she'd better wait for me. I need new socks. The army issue ones are terrible. And most importantly, he wrote about home, not as a sacred place to be defended at the cost of one's life, but as a place where life went on. Baseball, dozens, hundreds of letters were devoted to it. How are the Dodgers doing this season? Heard DiMaggio is on another hitting streak. To an American, baseball wasn't just a game. It was a symbol of order, rules, and peacetime. It was the metronome of normalcy. As long as baseball was being played, America was okay. Cars. Dad, take care of my Chevy. When I get back, we'll drive it to the lake. Heard Bobby bought himself a used Ford. Lucky guy. The car was a symbol of freedom, mobility, and prosperity. A symbol of a future that was sure to come. And girls. The letters were full of longing for their sweethearts. Plans for dates after the war. Jealousy and hope. They were saturated with the future. Not with a heroic death, but with the simple, awkward, beautiful life they were going to live. The American soldier did not write as a nameless cog in the war machine. He wrote as an individual, as Billy from St. Louis, who missed baseball, as Johnny from Brooklyn, who dreamed of his girl. His letter was not an act of service to the state. It was an act of saving himself. He dragged his world, a world of hot dogs, movies, and Saturday night dances, into his foxhole at the edge of the world to keep from going insane. The letter was an anchor that kept him tethered to reality while a storm raged around him. And in this lay a fundamental difference. The Japanese soldier wrote to accept death with dignity. The American soldier wrote so he wouldn't forget how to live. In the first hours of their work, the Japanese intelligence officers likely felt contempt. They read these letters and saw what their propaganda had told them. Americans were spoiled, infantile children. Their soldiers thought not of the glory of the empire, but of sweet pies. They were not warriors. They were merchants dressed in military uniforms. Their spirit was weak. They compared these letters to their own. Where were the lines about honour? Where was the readiness to die? Where was the understanding of the sacred nature of war? Nothing, just baseball and the girls. How can we lose to these children, they probably thought. Our Yamato Damashi spirit will crush their materialism. But the hours passed. The letters piled up, and contempt began to give way to confusion. Uncomfortable questions arose. Why is there no fear in their letters? Japanese letters were filled with fatalism and acceptance of death. American letters were filled with plans for the future. These children seemed absolutely certain they would return home. Where did this impossible, insulting confidence come from? Why does their home front live as if there is no war? Girls go to dances, fathers buy cars, baseball games are played. How is this possible? When all of Japan was on a war footing, when every family sacrificed everything for the front, when metal was taken even from temples to be melted down for weapons, how could their enemies afford the luxury of a normal life? And then, slowly, painfully, the realization began to dawn. Perhaps it wasn't that the Americans were stupid or naive. Perhaps it was that they were unbelievably, unimaginably strong. It is at this moment that a random letter about buying a used Chevy becomes more terrifying than any intercepted military order. What is a used Chevrolet to a Japanese officer in 1944? It's not just a car. It is a symbol that shatters his entire worldview. It means that in America there is a market for used cars, which means there is an excess of cars. It means that factories not engaged in producing tanks are still making civilian vehicles, or at least parts for them. It means there is gasoline for civilians. At a time when the Japanese fleet was anchored due to a lack of fuel, it means that an ordinary worker, a soldier's father, has enough money to make such a purchase. Suddenly, the intelligence captain realizes he is not reading a personal letter. He is reading an economic report, and this report tells him a single devastating fact. Every letter about baseball was a hammer blow to the ideology of Japanese militarism. That ideology said, spiritual strength Seishin will always conquer material strength, bushitsu. Japan might be poorer in resources, but its unbending warrior spirit would crush the soft materialistic enemy. And here, before the Japanese officers, lay irrefutable proof that this idea was a lie. A letter about a baseball game between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Brooklyn Dodgers is not just sports news. It means that thousands of young, healthy men are not on the front lines, but in a stadium. It means there is a functioning transportation system, trains and buses carrying teams and fans across the country. It means people have leisure time and disposable income for tickets. It means an entire entertainment industry continues to operate during wartime. This was not a sign of weakness, but of a colossal surplus of human resources. America could afford to send 16 million people to war and still have enough left over to keep playing baseball. A letter requesting comic books or a copy of Life magazine was not just a childish whim. It means there is a publishing industry. There is paper, ink, and printing presses. It means there is a postal service capable of delivering not just vital supplies, but non-essential pulp entertainment across an entire ocean right to the front lines. This was a sign of logistical superiority that was akin to magic. Every such letter was a page from the enemy's ledger, and the balance in that ledger was terrifying. For Japan, the war was total. Every aspect of life was subordinate to the war machine. The economy was stretched to its breaking point like a taut string. It was snapping. For America, the war was a project, one of many, a large, important project. But not the only one. The country had shifted its industry to a war footing, but it had enough capacity left over to continue producing refrigerators, cars, and Coca-Cola. A famous slogan in American factories declared, "The difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer." And the Japanese officers in their bunker suddenly understood that they were facing the impossible. They realized that their country, with all its bravery and self-sacrifice, was like a skilled knife fighter who had entered a ring against an opponent with a machine gun, who had a factory behind him producing 1,000 more machine guns a day. Spiritual strength was a beautiful idea, but it could not stop an assembly line. Imagine the psychological state of these intelligence officers. Their job was to find the enemy's vulnerabilities, but the more they worked, the more evidence they found of his invulnerability. Each opened envelope was not a victory, but another nail in the coffin of their hope. It was a slow poisoning. Day after day, week after week, they immersed themselves in the enemy's world, which was absurdly, indecently normal. And that normality was more terrifying than any tale of atrocities. How can you defeat a country that doesn't even see the need to talk about the war in its personal letters? How can you break the spirit of a nation that seems not to even notice it is fighting the largest war in its history? This created a cognitive dissonance that destroyed them from within. On one hand, their duty and propaganda demanded they believe in victory. They had to write reports, look for weak spots, and plan operations based on the assumption that victory was possible. On the other hand, they had thousands of pieces of evidence to the contrary, right before their eyes. They became the keepers of forbidden knowledge. They knew a truth they could not speak to anyone. This knowledge broke their will, but it did not release them from their duty. The intelligence captain could not simply go to his general and say, "Sir, we must surrender. I have read a letter stating that the Brooklyn Dodgers have defeated the Chicago Cubs. We are doomed." He would have been shot for cowardice and treason, so he had to continue. He had to send his soldiers to certain death. He had to plan suicide attacks. He had to demand from his men sacrifices whose futility he himself was already absolutely certain of. This is the deepest tragedy. The war in the Pacific continued long after some of its commanders realized it was lost. They became actors in a play whose ending they already knew. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not the cause of Japan's defeat. They were merely the bloody period at the end of a sentence that had been written long before. That sentence was written in ink on thin paper, in letters about baseball and used cars, and it was read in the silence of a stifling bunker, by men whose job was to find hope, but who instead found only irrefutable proof of their doom. Let's return to that bunker. One last time. The war is over. The silence no longer feels like a temporary lull between battles. It has become permanent. The intelligence captain, if he survived, now looks at these mountains of letters not as enemy dispatches, but as artifacts from another universe. What did he learn in that room? He learned that the true strength of a nation is not the number of its soldiers or the fanaticism of its warriors. True strength is the degree of its normalcy, its ability to withstand the most terrible storms while preserving its daily life, its small joys, its baseball. He realized they weren't trying to defeat an army, they were trying to defeat a civilization. And a civilization that can afford to dream of used Chevrolets in the middle of a world war cannot be defeated by force of arms. It can only be caught up with. And in this lies the great post-war irony. Japan, having suffered a crushing military defeat, drew the most important conclusion from those letters. It understood that the real war in the 20th century is a war of economies, and it channeled all its energy, all its discipline, and all its Yamato Damashi spirit, not into building aircraft carriers, but into building Toyotas and Panasonics. It wanted to become a country where fathers could buy their children cars, and soldiers could dream of returning to a normal life. Ultimately, this story is not about who was right and who was wrong, not about who was braver. It is about a fundamental clash of two ideas about what it means to be strong. One idea said that strength is the willingness to die. The other, without even realizing it, proved that true, unbreakable strength is the desperate and stubborn, sometimes foolish and infantile, but invincible desire to live. And that desire, expressed in millions of letters about the most mundane things, turned out to be the most powerful weapon the world has ever seen.